The moment I saw the certified letter in my mailbox, I knew it was from the Oakwood Estates Homeowners Association. Only they used that specific cream-colored stationery with the embossed letterhead that screamed, "We spent your dues on fancy paper instead of fixing the community pool." My fingers tensed around the envelope as I tore it open, already calculating how much of my freelance budget I'd have to reallocate for whatever arbitrary violation they'd dreamed up this time. "Dear Ms. Winters," the letter began in a font that somehow managed to look condescending. "It has come to our attention that the exterior paint of your residence at 427 Willow Lane does not comply with the approved color palette section 8.2 of the HOA Covenant. Your house appears to be painted in the shade of Desert Dawn, #E8D6C0, when the approved beige for your street section is Morning Wheat, #E6D4B. You have 30 days to repaint your exterior to the approved shade or face a fine of $150 per day until compliance is achieved." I stared at the letter, my graphic designer's brain immediately calculating the difference between the two hex codes. 2 values off. They were sending me a formal violation notice over a color difference so slight that no human eye could detect it without digital assistance. The letter was signed by Karen Hoffman, HOA Color Compliance Officer. Of course it was Karen. The same woman who had spent last year's 4th of July party explaining to anyone who'd listen how she'd invested in a professional-grade colorimeter to ensure neighborhood chromatic harmony. The same Karen who'd cornered me at the community garden to lecture me about the difference between acceptable taupe and non-compliant tan on garden trellises. I placed the letter on my kitchen counter and pulled out my laptop. As a graphic designer, I knew color theory better than most people knew their own children. I'd staked my career on understanding the nuances of CMYK, RGB, and Pantone codes. When I'd bought this house 2 years ago, I'd been meticulous about following the HOA guidelines. I'd specifically requested Morning Wheat at the paint store, watched them mix it, and supervised the painting crew. After pulling up the HOA documentation, I emailed my paint receipt to Karen with a polite note explaining that I had indeed used the approved color. An hour later, my phone rang. "Ms. Winters, this is Karen Hoffman from the HOA." Her voice had that particular nasal quality that seemed engineered to grate on nerves. "I received your email, but I'm afraid your documentation doesn't change the situation. I personally measured your house color yesterday with my colorimeter, and it registered as #E8D6C0, not the approved #E6D4B. The difference is negligible," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "It's within standard variation for exterior paint, especially after weathering." "Rules are rules," Karen replied with what sounded like genuine pleasure. "I've been color compliance officer for 7 years, and I've never approved a variance. Not even for the Millers when their house was only 1 value off on the blue channel." There was a pause, and I could almost hear her smirking through the phone. "You're a designer, right? You should understand the importance of precision." She had me there. I did understand precision. I also understood context, practicality, and the concept of diminishing returns, but I suspected those nuances would be lost on Karen. "I'll look into it," I said finally, and hung up before she could respond. The next day, I visited the local paint store where I'd originally purchased my house paint. The manager, Dave, remembered me. I was one of his regular customers for my design work. "This is ridiculous," Dave said after I explained the situation. "Those 2 shades are practically identical. But I can mix you up a new batch of Morning Wheat if you need it." "Before you do that," I said, "can you tell me when the HOA last updated their color charts? The ones you used to reference their approved colors?" Dave disappeared into the back room and returned with a binder. "Looks like they gave us this reference guide about 8 years ago. Karen brings it in every year to make sure our mixing formulas are precise. She's intense." "Can I see it?" Dave handed me the binder, and I flipped through until I found the Oakwood Estates section. There, neatly arranged, were all the approved colors for our neighborhood, with paint chips and corresponding hex codes. I took a picture of the Morning Wheat sample with my phone, then pulled out my portable color scanner, a tool I used for my design work to capture exact colors from physical objects. I scanned the paint chip, and my scanner displayed hashtag E6D4B, matching the approved code. But something felt off. The actual chip looked slightly different from what I remembered selecting for my house. Dave, do you have the original formula for morning wheat? He checked his computer. Sure. It's been the same for years. And when you mix it, what color does it actually produce? Have you ever tested the final product? Dave looked at me oddly but seemed to catch my drift. Let me make a sample. 20 minutes later, we were looking at a freshly painted sample board. I let it dry, then scanned it with my color tool. Hashtag E8D6C0. Exactly the color of my house. Exactly the color Karen claimed was non-compliant. This is interesting, I said, trying to contain my excitement. The color chart says morning wheat should be hashtag E6D4BE, but when you mix it according to the formula, it actually produces hashtag E8D6C0. Dave scratched his head. That's weird. I wonder if there was a printing error when they made the color chart. I felt a smile spreading across my face. I think I need to do a little more research. That evening, I dug into the HOA's original documents. Oakwood Estates had been built in the early 2000s, and the original developer had created all the covenants, including the color guidelines. After some digging and a few favors called in from a former client who worked at the county records office, I found the original, legal color specifications. The developer had used a professional printing company to create the color charts. But here was the critical detail: the legal document specified the paint formulas but not the hex codes for the final colors. The hex codes had been added later, presumably as a reference. I spent the next week quietly collecting evidence. I borrowed a friend's drone to take aerial photos of the neighborhood. I used my scanner to check the actual colors of other houses, particularly Karen's pristine colonial with its perfect sandstone beige exterior. I reviewed meeting minutes from when Karen had been appointed Color Compliance Officer, noting her proud declaration that she had digitized the color compliance process for the modern era. Armed with my findings, I requested a spot at the next HOA meeting. At the meeting, Karen sat front and center, her highlighting pen poised over the agenda as if ready to strike at any non-regulation discussions. When my turn came, I approached the front with my laptop and a portable projector. Good evening, I began. I'm here to discuss an issue with our color compliance standards. As you know, I recently received a violation notice regarding my house color. Karen's smile was tight. Yes, and the compliance deadline is next week. About that, I said, connecting my laptop to the projector. I've discovered something interesting about our color standards. I displayed my presentation, starting with the original developer's documents. As you can see, the legally binding document specifies paint formulas, not hex codes. The hex codes were added as a reference in the printed materials. I clicked to the next slide. This is where things get interesting. The printed color chart distributed to residents and paint stores contains an error. The hex code listed for morning wheat is hashtag E6D4B, but when mixed according to the legally binding formula, it actually produces hashtag E8D6C0, the exact color of my house. Murmurs spread through the room. Karen's face had gone rigid. To verify this wasn't a one-time mixing error, I had samples made at 3 different paint stores. All produced the same result. I showed photos of the samples with their scanned color codes. Furthermore, I continued, clicking to a new slide, I've analyzed the exterior colors of all 42 houses in our neighborhood. Every single house painted in an approved color actually deviates from the hex codes in our printed materials, because they're all mixed according to the formulas, not matched to the incorrect hex codes. The room was silent now. I clicked to my final slide. Including, I said, pausing for effect, Ms. Hoffman's house. On the screen appeared a drone photo of Karen's house, alongside a color scan showing its actual hex code, hashtag E2D0B9. Below it was the approved hex code for sandstone beige, hashtag E0CFB8. Ms. Hoffman's house is also out of compliance according to the standard she's been enforcing, I explained. As are all of our houses. Because the standard itself is flawed. Karen stood up, her face flushed. This is absurd. My house is perfectly compliant. I measure it weekly. You measure it against the printed chart, which has incorrect hex codes, I replied calmly. The legal standard is the formula, not the hex code. And by that standard, my house is compliant, while yours actually isn't. The HOA president, a retired attorney named Walter, cleared his throat. What exactly are you proposing, Ms. Winters? We have two options, I said. Either we acknowledge that the formulas are the legal standard, making my house and most others compliant, or we update the legal documents to match the hex codes, which would require nearly everyone, including Ms. Hoffman, to repaint their houses. Karen was spluttering now. But my colorimeter is measuring against an incorrect standard, I finished for her. Your tool is accurate, but the reference point is wrong. The meeting dissolved into chaos after that. Some residents were angry, some confused, some clearly delighted to see Karen's color tyranny challenged. Walter called for a special committee to review the evidence and make a recommendation. 3 weeks later, the HOA issued a new color chart with updated hex codes that matched the actual paint formulas. My violation notice was rescinded. Karen resigned as color compliance officer, citing personal reasons. The following spring, as I was planting new flowers in my front garden, I noticed Karen outside her house, supervising a painting crew. Rumor had it that Walter had privately informed her that if she didn't bring her own house into compliance with the revised standards, he would be forced to issue her a violation. I waved cheerfully as I deadhead my perfectly compliant sunset orange marigolds. Karen pretended not to see me, but I didn't mind. The new paint on her house looked nice, a true sandstone beige, properly mixed and properly measured. As a designer, I'd always believed that colors should bring joy, not anxiety. Karen had turned color into a weapon. I'd simply returned it to its proper place, as something that brings beauty to our world, even when it's off by a value or two. Please like and subscribe for more great HOA and other revenge story videos. We appreciate your support. Do you have a story about a run-in with an HOA officer or board member? We'd love to hear about it. Please feel free to share in the comments.